All right, McMullen is in the house. He's brought to you by Harrah's Atlantic City, Bally's Wild Wild West. They're now taking bets to the book. Wager today. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Break up with your bookie. My bookie wants to break up with me. I keep beating him. Had a good week in the six-pack. No, I lied. Did not have a good week in the six-pack. I gave you Indy, Atlanta, and Carolina. They were my six-pack of picks. They were not good. That was the first losing week I've had in a while in the six-pack of picks. All right, let's dive into this mess that we had yesterday. 48-7, the Eagles go down. What does it mean? Where do they go from here? John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. John, how are you?
Doing well. How are you, Mike?
I'm well. I'm trying to stay somewhat level-headed here, and I think you have to. I mean, I don't think you can look at the score of the game yesterday and overreact to what you see. I mean, as a team.
Well, you can. I can tell you many fans have been overreacting. You have a number of things from Mike Lombardi was right about Doug Peterson to Nick Foles should be the starting quarterback. I'm sure you got a few of those.
Few, not as many as I thought.
Yeah. Well, if you get one, that's too many.
Yeah.
But
I think Carson is definitely in the conversation. I know I'm not advocating for him to be benched at all, but he has not played very well.
No, that I would argue that was his worst game as a professional. Clearly pressing once they got behind, trying to make plays that weren't there. Doug Peterson brought that up today. He played a really, really bad football game, but everybody, even Drew Brees, believe it or not, has played a bad football game in his past. So you can't overreact to these things, and this is one of those losses where it's such an outlier. You sort of just throw it out and move on the best you can, and it only counts the same as a 10-7 loss. So that's sort of how you have to handle it.
Right. I mean, I get the premise there. I see it happen all the time in the league. Like, the final score of the game, so many people look at that and just overreact. The game got away from them. They ran out of bodies, and it was bad. But we saw Tennessee beat New England a week ago, and you feel good about them. They got smoked yesterday. They didn't show up.
Yeah,
So
it happens all the time in this
right.
league.
It's a very week-to-week thing where one week you look really good and one week you look really bad, but that doesn't really define. Now, this team is starting to go down a road that we're beginning to define them as not a very good football team. I think that's fair.
Yeah, that's very fair. Under 500, in third place in a very bad division. And remember, now they're closer to the New York Giants than they are the Washington Redskins. So that tells you where they are as a team. And I'll be honest with you, if Crevan LeBlanc and Chandon Sullivan and
that kills me.
and Devontae Bosby are out there, well, they're not going to win. So a lot of it depends on the injury situation. And that was better than we thought it was going to be today. Specifically, Avonte Maddox, when that happened, I thought, well, his season's over. And it's not as bad as presumed. And in fact, Doug listed him as day-to-day, and in Doug Peterson parlance, that means he at least has a chance to play this week against the Giants. And Rasul Douglas is in that day-to-day category as well. So we'll see how that shakes out during the week. But they need Jalen Mills back. You know, he's been vilified by this fan base. All of a sudden, he might be the most important part of this team. They need him back. They need Maddox back. They need Douglas back. Sidney Jones is going to be week to week again, so he's going to be out multiple weeks. They need help at corner, and you can't go out and get it on the street this time of year.
No, you can't. And obviously, you know, this team was decimated yesterday as it continued to go on. They were just outmanned yesterday, outmanned on the defensive side of the ball. But what's the offense's excuse? What's their problem? Like, you know, we hear all the time, hey, I don't want to hear injuries as an excuse. Well, they have to be an excuse. I didn't go into the game thinking Crevon LeBlanc was going to be a big part of my game plan. You know what I'm saying? But the offense.
Yeah, I mean, nobody wants to use injuries as an excuse in this league, and it's the way to go. You shouldn't. From a coaching standpoint, you can never do that. And I always explain it's not an excuse. It's an explanation. It's a legitimate explanation.
Right, exactly. It's, hey, why? If I went into that game yesterday and you told me Sullivan, and LeBlanc were going to play the snaps they did, I would say they're going to get blown out.
Yeah. I wouldn't even go to that law firm. But if it's, offensively, other than Jason Kelsey leaving after 6 snaps, which is big, but they're much more well-equipped to handle, even though that's an all-pro level player, because Stefan Wisniewski has started a heck of a lot of games in this league at both center and left guard. So it's not nearly as dramatic as the drop-off at corner where they were without. Once Douglas finally leaves that game, they're without their top 5 corners. So that's a legitimate, whatever you want to call it, excuse, explanation. Offensively, they just stunk the joint out. And I think everybody has a piece of that pie from the coaching staff. We talked a lot about the game planning, especially asked Doug about the scripted plays again today. They're just not working, whether that's the absence of Frank Reich or not, or it's execution. They can't seem to get a handle on how to use Golden Tate in this offense. And that trade, at least after 2 weeks, is looking like a really, really bad one. To give up a 3rd-round pick for a player you're not even going to get involved. We talked about the running game all year. Josh Adams, the small amount of carries he gets, he seems to be effective, except in key situations. I mean, you start the game out with a run, and it's a 1-yard loss because it gets blown up, and all of a sudden it's 2nd and long. And then that play's ineffective. And then you come up a half-yard short on 3rd down, and you're 3 and out. And all of a sudden, the Saints go down. You do pretty well defensively, but they take the lead, and then you're 3 and out again. And then you're 2 and out, because then the next drive was the interception trying to go deep to Nelson Aguilar, when Carson was pressing because they were behind, I think, 10-0 at the time.
Yeah.
And he's trying to make a play. And from there, you talk about this all the time. I talked about it in the NFC Championship game, where the Eagles were on the other end of this. There are certain games where the snowball starts rolling down the hill, and you can't stop it. And that's what happened to the Eagles.
Yeah, no,
Doesn't mean they're going to lose 48-7 if they play the Saints again and they're a little bit more healthy.
Well, and it felt like yesterday that the Saints took great joy in picking apart that defense. Like, they were like, you know what, this is a lot of fun. Let's just keep doing it. And, they have every right to do that. I don't have a problem with it. People were saying, punt it, do this. I don't care. Run the score up you want. I don't care what the final – like, people look at 48-7 and it drives them – I don't care what the final score is. It's 1 week and it's over with. So run the score up all you want. It's not indicative of how the next week's game's going to go.
No, and you can't, call your book fearless and talk about aggression and people changing. And by the way, Doug has changed this game. By the way, he played
yesterday, John,
season.
I said the same thing. You look at all these teams going for 2, all these teams going for it on 4th down. I said, man, what an impact this guy, the 2017-18 Philadelphia Eagles really had.
Yeah, they had a tremendous impact, and we always talk about this being a copycat league, and you see it, and people sort of taking parts of that philosophy. One part of that philosophy is aggression. So when it works, and you're high-fiving, and you're dancing, and you're electric sliding, and feeling good, well, understand the other side's going to do it too. So maybe if they have a chance to run up the score. And maybe it's just because Doug Peterson kept beating Sean Payton at golf. Who knows? But you're right. He's got the right to do it, and he did it. and who cares? 48-7 is no different from 24-7, 10-7, like I said. One loss is one loss.
No, exactly, and especially with the personnel you end up with. Look, if you get beat 48-7 and you're looking around and Ronald Darby and Jalen Mills and Rodney McLeod are out there getting smoked 48-7, I might have a little bit of a problem. I can understand losing 48-7 under the circumstances. Now, the one problem I do have with more trouble understanding is how are they only scoring 7? Especially, look, I get it. It seemed that the Saints were pretty intent on rubbing it in and embarrassing you, but no garbage time. They couldn't move the ball when this game was well at hand. That's concerning.
Well, yeah, it's concerning, but the bigger concern for me is all year the offense has just not been clicking.
Oh, absolutely.
In this particular game, I just kind of throw it out. As I said, that's Carson Wentz's worst game as a professional. Right. I don't think it's going to be consistent moving forward. I joked his most accurate throw was when he threw his helmet. He was bad.
Yeah.
And it's just not going to be that way every week.
No, it's the theory of like when the Sixers lose and Ben Simmons has 11 turnovers in that game. If you think he's going to turn the ball over 11 times, then yes, this team is in big trouble. If you think Carson Wentz is going to play like this consistently moving forward, then yes, they're in big trouble.
Yeah, they're in desperate straits, but that's not going to happen. And you should know that's not going to happen. And that's why I said this is one of those games where the snowball started running down the hill. Nobody could stop it. And from that point, it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse, and the pressing becomes worse and worse and worse, and it keeps making bad throws and bad decisions. It's not going to be like that every week.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying, look, it's not an excuse. It's just the way this game works, in the fact that sometimes you don't have it. You happen to not have it. As I said, we've seen Carson for parts of 3 seasons. I think it's pretty evident that he's not going to play like that each and every week. So from that standpoint, I think you just throw out the film. You don't even look at it and say, what are the issues as a whole throughout the whole season, and go about trying to correct that, about trying to get Golden Tate involved. And to me, that's the bad stuff, because I've seen no evidence that they've been able to do this to this point, so I don't know why that's turning around. But they're not going to lose 48-7 every week, even if this season goes even farther south.
John McMullen, of course, 97.3 ESPN.com. You mentioned about the secondary. How do they move forward here? What was some of the resolution today from Doug, Sidney Jones, Russell, Douglas? Where is Mills? I mean, who are they going to throw out there against Odell Beckham next week?
Well, like I said, Jalen Mills might be all of a sudden the most important player on this team, because they need him back, and they need him back desperately. And that's not to say he's going to be the tonic for these ills, but he's an NFL player. He knows what he's doing, and it'll be a huge upgrade over what they were rolling out. But they need more than that, because, as I said, when the gun sounded yesterday, they were without their top 5 corners. Well, we know Darby's not coming back. He's gone for the year. So then you talk about Sidney Jones. He's not coming back, and boy, has he been a disappointment anyway. He's week to week with a hamstring, and in Doug's lexicon, that means he's going to miss some time. So you have Rasul Douglas, who also hurt his knee. He was listed as day-to-day, so there's just there's at least a chance that he'll be able to play. We'll get a better feel for Wednesday. Same for Avonte Maddox. Boy, they need at least one of those guys to be able to go. And it's pretty amazing. I thought Avonte was done for the year, looking at his injury. So I don't know how either of them could play this week, but when he says day-to-day, it's a possibility.
There's a lot to dive into. We talked about this in the first couple hours when Mosher was here doing his Mosher Monday stuff. On offense, is there anybody glaring that stands out that they need an upgrade over?
No, you look at, the problem is there is some glaring issues. I think running back has been a glaring issue, but I think they've tweaked it and they've got their best running back on the field. The problem is he's probably not good enough as an undrafted rookie in Josh Adams, but he's going to take over the lead role. And then Nelson Aguilar, I think, has been terribly disappointing. I think they're fighting. They're sort of swimming upstream for whatever reason. They don't want to alienate him. They don't want to upset him, and they keep giving him significant playing time. I think now the tape is here. I think you got to be real about it, and you got to scale that back. But those are the only two things I can point at. Everybody else is clearly.
Well, last year, early in the year, John, they were struggling. They lost that game against Kansas City, and everybody said the left guard spot is glaring. It needs to be updated. And they did. They put in Chance Warmack, and then they eventually ended up going to Wisniewski. But that was a pretty clear deficiency. I don't know that there's a guy that you're like, they got to really, like, in other words, the personnel doesn't seem to be the biggest problem, right?
Well, I think the personnel that's there hasn't played as well as they played last season, almost to a man. Jason Kelsey has been injured. And before the elbow yesterday, he's been playing through a knee injury. Hasn't been the same player. He's been good, but not the same level of dominance. Lane Johnson's playing through a knee injury, played through an ankle injury before. He's not the same guy. He's not the best right tackle in football like he was last year. Brandon Brooks is good. He's having a good year, but he's not playing as well as last year. Jason Peters is better than Big V, but he's not Jason Peters of what he once was. So they don't have anybody better in reserve, and they flip-flop back at left guard. I don't think that matters, to tell you the truth. It's both about even, whether they put Wisniewski or Sayamalu out there. They just feel more comfortable with Wiz as a backup for the reason of what just happened yesterday in case Jason Kelsey has to go out. They don't have better players in reserve. So to me, when you look at that offensive line, and when you want to talk about the rest of the league, it's still a good offensive line compared to the rest of the league. It's just not nearly as good as it was last year. They were just playing at a higher level, the individual parts.
Mm-hmm. There's no question that that's a big problem here. Jeff mentioned the running back. You just talked about it. I mean, if they had a Blunt and a Jai, is this team different right now?
Yeah, I think Jay would help a lot. Because he's a competent NFL back. I think people overrate those guys. Now we have this revisionist history because the Eagles won the Super Bowl. It's not Alvin Kamara back there. It's not Todd Gurley. But they were competent professional backs who could help you and do things situationally. But I think even if they were here, I think you would like an improvement. You can't have an improvement. But certainly – yeah, they're better than Josh Adams. Although I will say, 2 years down the line, this might be a totally different question. And this is the issue you have with football, and this is what makes football so difficult because you have to sort of juggle potential and production. Josh Adams has got a lot of potential, and maybe you got to suffer through a stretch of games to get him to reach his ceiling as a player, and then a year or two down the line, you're really happy about it. I don't know. You have to start looking for the silver lining in situations like this. And the fact that even if he wasn't injured, Jay Ajayi, we talked a lot, was not going to be back here next year. He just wasn't. In fact, if he had a big year, it would be less likely that he would be back because he would be more likely to get a good contract. So these are the kind of things you have to weigh, but certainly in the short term on a particular Sunday against the New Orleans Saints, you'd rather have the veteran guy, no question.
What'd you think of the way they used Tate?
Awful. It's terrible when you consider the year too, and you consider the circumstance, because it's very rare that you will have three big-name receivers traded at the same trade deadline, and you can compare to what Dallas has done with Amari Cooper, what Houston has done with Demaryius Thomas. And by the way, those guys have had bad games as well, but they've tried to get them involved. They've made an effort to get them involved. Now, I'm not going to say the Eagles made far more of an effort in week 2 out there for 70% of the snaps, but it doesn't seem to be the right effort. It seems to be forcing the ball on manufactured touches, and Doug talked about pressing of Carson Wentz. I think Doug is pressing as well to try to get something going on this offense, and it's just not working. And maybe it's because you have 2 slot receivers and you're trying to serve 2 masters, and that's what I talked about with Aguilar. Look, I'm not interested in not upsetting Nelson Aguilar. That's what the NFL is. That's what professional sports is. I mean, sometimes you got to step on some toes and say, look, you're not playing the way we thought you were going to play, so we had to go out and get this guy. Yeah. That's what sports is. And I see the Eagles kind of walking on eggshells to try to protect some psyches, and they got to win football games.
What'd you think of that Peter King piece that basically said they wanted to put the ball in Wentz's hands? Does that tell you that they know Doug Peterson isn't going to run the ball, or is that them saying we don't think Wentz can beat us?
No, I think that's them saying the Eagles can't win a shootout against us, and I think they're right. And if you throw for 350 yards in this league, probably a good chance you're going to lose. You have to be an offense that performs at the level of the Saints, who came into that. Understand, they came into that game as the 6th highest scoring offense in NFL history at this point of the season. So this is one of the great offenses of all time. So you can take them as an outlier and say they can throw for 350 yards and win games. The average NFL team, if you're throwing for 350, 400, that means usually you're behind.
Right.
You're trying to catch up. You're turning the football over. There's a lot of 400-yard passing games that go in a negative direction for that reason. So to me, what Sean Payton was saying is that they can't beat us in a shootout. We want to make them one-dimensional, make them throw the football all over the field. And I think he's right. It turned out, I mean, they didn't need to beat them in the shootout, but if they did, it would have been 48-40 instead of 48-7.
What'd you think of Doug today? I mean, throwing mud up against the wall, eventually will stick, keep pressing the message, press it. I mean, it sounded like a guy almost run out of answers.
Well, in his defense, I don't know what you can do. I think people overrate. I said this at the trade deadline. You can't change your identity as a football team midway through a season.
Right.
That's not how it works. That's off-season stuff.
No, and that's something something Spagnuolo was on with us last week that he talked about in terms of the game plan in mid-game. We talk about the defense. He said once you start losing guys, you can't just change your game plan. You went in with a game plan. No. You got to stick with the game plan, even if the guys you put in there aren't the best players for that game plan.
Yeah, there's not much you can do with injuries, and very rarely are you going to lose your top 5 corners for one specific game. So, yeah, I mean, there's nothing you can do as far as dialing things up and doing some different things. You prepared all week, and understand in today's NFL, you don't have as much preparation, on-field preparation time as you used to have. So it's even more so in the fact that you don't have a ton of reps to work with. You don't have a ton of padded practices. So it's difficult to change midstream. And certainly nobody changes identity. So at this point, you know what you are as a team. Everybody knows this, good, bad, indifferent, from the best team to the worst team. They know what they are. So the only thing you can do at this point is try to do what you do as best as possible. And that's, I think, what Doug was trying to say.
Got the Giants coming up. Got the Redskins after that. Got Dallas after that. I know a lot of people don't want to hear it, but they're kind of in the mix here. It feels like that Chip Kelly year where they would lose. It would be an awful loss, like disheartening, like lack of effort. I don't think – do you think yesterday was a lack of effort?
No, I mean, I think it's more of you start feeling sorry for yourself when it does become so lopsided. And I think it's more frustration. Certainly not early. I think, late in the game, you can see some guys with some, bowing of heads and not the best body language. But that's gonna happen in any 48-7 game.
Right.
I don't think as a whole effort.
Like those Chip Kelly teams, I'd be at the end of the game like, this team just doesn't want to be here. They quit. I didn't get that feel yesterday. I mean, there were a lot of people who did not in the locker room who did not like Chip Kelly, especially at the end. So I could see that more happening. I haven't seen that with Doug yet. I haven't seen it at all with specific players questioning what they're doing or how they're doing things. You saw that a lot with Chip Kelly. So I think there's some stark differences there. I think people are starting to question, maybe we've talked about a lot, maybe Frank Reich is more important than people thought he was. And even that, to me, is a little bit easy, the easy way out. I certainly think he helped in game planning. But I got news for you. Even if they had those first 15 scripted plays and they were clicking on all cylinders, they weren't going to win yesterday. No, and that's something that you asked Doug about today. For more on the Eagles this week, head to 97.3 ESPN.com. We've got a short week, so we'll certainly be breaking down this Eagles-Giants game starting tomorrow because it's a big one. Eagles-Giants now has a lot of meaning behind it, which is good. I like the fact that this Eagles-Giants week has a little more juice. That first one was a little weak. We got to get this Eagles-Giant week back going. And then Eagle-Redskin, Eagle-Cowboys, back-to-back-to-back division games. Let's see if the Birds can get themselves back into it after the 48-7 loss to the Rams. John, thanks, pal.
Hey, thanks, Mike.